Right. Well, thanks everybody for being with us this afternoon. Special thanks to Ziming for accepting my invitation to give this seminar. The format we have in mind is 30 minutes of Ziming going over his slides and then 30 minutes for Q&A. That doesn't mean that you can not ask questions in the first 30 minutes. You can, and I hope you do, so we can have a more engaging conversation. With that, Ziming, you can start when you are ready.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you so much for the invitation. Let me just start. You guys can see my screen well, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So yeah. So please feel free to interrupt me if you have questions during the first 30 minutes. So I will mainly talk about our recent work, Kolmogorov-Arnold networks. So today's AI is built upon this math theorem called the universal approximation theorem, which basically written here says that a high-dimensional function can be written as a linear combination of some random features constructed with this nonlinear function sigma. And this is known as the multi-layer perceptron. And today we want to explore another alternative math theorem called the Kolmogorov-Arnold representation theorem, and see if we can use this new alternative theorem to build another another building type of building block to build another AI building. So the KA representation theorem, or short as CART, is basically saying that if f is a multivariate continuous function, then f can be written as a finite composition of continuous functions of a single variable and the binary operation of addition. So basically this formula, it looks a bit complicated, but I will give you some pictorial, I will give you some intuitive diagram later. So don't worry about that. But to appreciate this theorem, it tells us that you can decompose a high-dimensional function into a bunch of 1D dimensions and only the summing operation, which is quite great news, because in machine learning, usually you need to approximate the high-dimensional functions. And this tells us that you can actually break down these high-dimensional functions into 1D functions and summing. So this simplified the problem to a great extent. But there is an immediate plot twist. Back in 1989, there's this paper claiming that Kolmogorov's theorem is irrelevant for neural network learning. They say that they wrote that we review Kolmogorov's theorem on the representation of functions of several variables and show that it is irrelevant in the context of networks for learning. So this is really sad. Like, this basically sentenced the CART theorem to death for like 30, 40, for like 40 years. Is this the end of the story? And the answer is no. So let's take a look at what's going on and why they say it's irrelevant. So the basic idea is that although the theorem says the existence of such 1D functions, they only constrain these functions to be 1D functions to be continuous. So they are not necessarily to be smooth. However, only smooth functions are of interest and are practically learnable. So that's the gap of the smoothness. So because of this smoothness argument, they say that it fails to be the theorem fails to be true if we constrain the inner functions to be smooth. So that's their argument. Although this argument is mathematically sound, I'm personally trained as a physicist, so I'm more naively optimistic. So firstly, empirically, maybe we do not care about exact representations. Maybe if we just find approximate representations, and that might suffice. And secondly, a common wisdom of modern deep learning is that is just going deeper. Even under the smooth constraints, deep neural nets may be more expressive and might be enough. And thirdly, let's have this can-do spirit. Let's just build the new network and see how it works. Cans may not work for the worst cases, but may work for the typical cases. This is, again, a discrepancy, a difference between math research and physics research. So in math, people care a lot about worst cases, but in physics, we care a lot about the typical cases. So with the can-do spirit, me and my collaborators extend this theorem and propose this new architecture called Kolmogorov-Arnold networks. So first I will introduce some math and then some algorithmic implementation, and then followed by two good properties of CANs, one being accurate, one being interpretable, followed by some discussion. So the math foundation, as I mentioned, but let me review again, is that given a n-dimensional function, by that I mean a function take in n variables and output one variable. You can easily extend to many output variables, but here for simplicity, let's just do one variable. So then it can be decomposed into a formula of this form. So here the phi qp and capital phi q, all of them are just one-dimensional functions, basically taking in one number, output one number. And you see the big summation symbols here. So basically saying that in this formula, you got this in the bracket, and within the bracket, you got some summation symbol, and in the outer loop, you also got this summation symbol. Looks a bit complicated, but let me give you an intuitive diagram. So actually, it's corresponding to this diagram, taking in two variables and output one variable. So here, for simplicity, we set n to be 2, but you can easily generalize to other cases as well. So this formula is equivalent to this two-layer network with 5 hidden neurons. So now each hidden neuron takes in some nonlinear transformation phi11 of x1 plus phi12 of x2. And the same thing also applies to other neurons. And then to get the output, you apply this nonlinear transformation, capital phi I, to the hidden activations, and then sum everything up. And so that's how you get the output. Maybe to make things more intuitively, you can even just draw these symbols as 1D curves because they are formulas, because they're 1D functions, so they correspond to 1D curves. So this is naturally a neural network. It has this hierarchy. It has 2 layers. And the first layer basically have 2 inputs, 5 outputs, and the second layer have 5 inputs and 1 output. So we can easily define the so-called CAN layer. And now the original representation by the theorem is basically just stacking. You can basically get the network by stack 2 CAN layers. After we have the definition of the CAN layer, we can easily stack more and more CAN layers to get deeper and deeper CANs. Here we just show an example of a 3-layer CAN, but you can easily get it to be deeper and deeper. So you might be wondering, why do we need deeper CANs? Because the original theorem says that it's only 2-layer. But recalling again the 1989 paper, it says that for 2-layer constructions, the inner functions can sometimes be very pathological, be non-smooth. So hopefully, with the benefit of depth, we can get more power, more expressive power, even under the smoothness constraint. Yeah, because it's a PDF. Originally, my PowerPoint it's supposed to be a video, but it's not showing the training process. But you have my word. I promise that after training, you will see that it will pop up something simple, and the activation function. This activation functions become exponential. This becomes a sine. This becomes a sine, and other activations become squared, like corresponding to this formula. So, like for this formula, you would notice that you would need at least 3-layer CANs to do the task, and this is indeed the case. You cannot fit this function quite well with just a 2-layer. Yeah. Is there any question?
Yeah, sorry. So if you add one more layer here, the new layer, will it take the form of identity function?
Yes. If you add one more layer, it will learn the identity function. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Yeah. So we can compare MLP and CAN side by side to get a more clearer sense what the differences are. So as I said, MLP is based on the universal approximation theorem. CAN is based on the Kolmogorov-Arnold representation theorem, and their formula are like this and this. they look completely different, but actually when we try to draw the diagram, you see that the diagrams look quite similar. So for MLPs, you have learnable weights, you have learnable linear weights on edges, shown as this blue and red lines, and you have fixed activation functions on nodes. But for KAN, you have learnable activation functions on edges, while on nodes, it's basically the summing operation, which has nothing to learn. So this is so MLP and KANs are dual in the sense that the nodes and edges are learnable fixed or learnable. And you can easily stack, in both cases, you can easily stack MLPs to be deeper and also stack KANs to be deeper because we have defined the basic building block, like the linear layer and the KAN layer, and you can just stack more layers to get deeper networks.
Sorry, Zeming, I think we have a question.
Yep.
Yeah, please go ahead. Ali, I think it's Professor Kutsi. If you have a question, please go ahead. You have raised your hand.
Yes. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, just I wanted to thank you for your nice presentation. So I wanted to ask that what's the difference between this structure and RBF? So RBF is exactly the same. You have learnable functions.
Yes.
RBF bases on edges and just summation on nodes.
Yes, great question. And indeed, I think there's a recent paper after our paper posted out proposed RBF-based KANs. So they basically place. So here for the activation functions on edges, I parameterize it with splines, but you can also parameterize it with radial basis functions. Well, if you ask me to compare with that, the original RBF, I'd say that my understanding about RBF is that you only have one layer. That is, you have predefined bases and you don't have RBF after RBF after RBF. But here we allow this mechanism to stack deeper and deeper. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Well, actually, my point is that I see the difference. Here you may have a spline and RBF, they have RBF functions. But in terms of a structure, seems that to be exactly the same. And RBF can have more than 2 layers. You can build up on that. And it seems to me, I mean, RBF has been around for a long time, and it seems to me that it's exactly the same structure. Difference that the basis functions are different.
Right. So yeah, so I guess there are two things. One thing is about the structure, and another thing is about like there are two things. External degrees. Sorry, I'm from a physics background, so the difference are like the external degrees of freedom, like the overall computational graph. I guess it's something new, but the microscopic degrees of freedom, like the way how we construct these functions, are something old. Like you can parameterize it with splines or with RBF, but how these things are connected and put activation functions on edges, and this is kind of new. Maybe they're equivalent in some senses, but to the best of my knowledge, I still feel that there are at least some subtle difference.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
I think we have another question. Ehsan, I think you had a...
Yes. So yeah, that's a nice model. So I was wondering that in the KAN model, when you have a node, then you said that okay, we are going to train the function. So can we replace a function with like the regular neural network with lots of edges, and then we train or approximate that function based on the regular MLP? And if so, how you distinguish how your model KAN is better than the regular one?
Yep. So in principle, you can turn a KAN into an MLP, but that would require more parameters. So so my first point is about parameter efficiency, because KAN have some structures that MLPs do not have, and those like again, what an activation function on edges mean is that you have one input. You can think of it as a neural network, but basically taking one input, one output, and different inputs that don't talk to each other. So that's so you can say that KAN might be a special case of MLPs, but this is kind of inductive biases that I will mention, very aligned with some symbolic and scientific tasks. So although on the expressive level, they may approximate, well, they're both universal approximators, so they must be able to approximate any high-dimensional continuous functions in theory. But we also care a lot about, in practically, their scaling laws. And KANs can have better scaling laws than MLPs. Although in theory, when you have a large enough KAN and large enough MLP, they should be equivalent, but we care about finite-sized MLPs and KANs. And there's also this problem of interpretability that I will mention later, which MLPs do not have, but KANs have.
And as a follow-up, so then okay, so you're saying that all of the benefits from KAN compared to the MLP, but for MLP, you just say, let's say you use the activation function ReLU, then that's all. So you don't have to worry about how many activation functions are there. But here, how many functions you are going to learn. So that a little bit like, you may say, okay, that's learnable. So we just define, okay, 10 functions we want to learn, but that adds more complexity to the problem because someone else come with another, like the set of the function.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree. So there's no free lunch. MLPs and KANs, we cannot say that KAN is always better than MLP or MLP is always better than KANs. But later I will show that for some symbolic formulas and for tasks in scientific tasks where we know that there exists some, sparse computational graph, and where, like in science, we care a lot about have a lot about the squared function, the sine function, and in that cases we want interpretability and we want some functions to be learnable. So KAN would be a better use case for that. But in other cases, like for region, for language, maybe MLPs are better than KANs in the sense that, MLPs are well developed and maybe it has better inductive biases with those tasks than KANs. So yeah, I guess it depends on the use cases a lot.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Sorry, Professor Kuhandel, I can read or you can say yourself, but Professor Kuhandel wrote that, can we say that KANs are more flexible due to their learnable activation functions used for specific tasks, whereas RBF networks use fixed types of radial basis functions?
Yeah, I think we can say that. Actually, if you can parameterize this learnable activations as a linear combination of RBFs. In that case, the two things becomes almost similar. It's just that you cannot only just use one basis of RBF for one activation, then you're just simply fixing it to be RBF. But instead, you can have a linear combination of RBF at different locations and make their magnitudes trainable. Then you regain this flexibility to approximate any function you want, like arbitrarily well, as you have more and more RBFs. Yeah.
Go ahead, Matthew. Yeah, you are mute. Could you unmute yourself? Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that was getting to my question, because you are using a family of learnable activation functions.
Yes.
It's not just any activation functions. And so those could be RBFs. You talked about using splines.
Yes.
And because if you had arbitrary activation functions, you couldn't do that because the number of parameters would be too large. Yes.
Yeah, in principle, people are also trying some polynomial functions, like orthogonal, like Chebyshev, things like that. Fourier basis. You have all the freedom to try such things, but but I just I and my advisor love the spline function, so we went for the spline function. That's the only reason. There's nothing more preventing you from other functions.
Sorry, a follow-up question. In the paper, you talk about this KN approximation theorem, where you put an upper bound on the error.
Yeah.
Will that theory hold if you use basis functions other than B-splines?
Great question. Short answer is no.
Okay.
You need this Taylor expansion like things because we're using cubic spline, which are polynomials. But the long answer is that with better choice of activations, you may get even better scaling. For example, if you use Fourier basis, and if your function to be approximated is not long-tailed, it decays really fast, and then it's likely that you will get an exponential decay. But then that depends on your use case.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the theory says that if you want to really be safe, the theory provides guarantees on the upper bound only with B-splines as the basis functions.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we don't have any more questions. Please continue. Thank you.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much for the questions. I think they're all right to the point. So yeah, regarding the algorithmic details, I don't want to dig too deep into it, but there are just a few quick things I want to mention. So the first thing, I already mentioned that we are using B-splines. So what are B-splines? So B-splines are this local basis, and the way we construct a curve is basically, so this phi of x is basically a linear combination of this B-spline local basis, and the linear coefficients are the trainable parameters. What's nice about this B-spline formulation is that, like splines, you can easily switch between coarse-grained and fine-grained grids. You can start from a coarse-grained grid, but when you want to go more accurate, you can just use a more finer grained grid to get more accuracy. Yep.
Sorry, can I ask a question here? So 2 questions. First of all, how do you decide when to refine the grid? And second, how to decide the position of the points in the refined grid?
Great question. Yeah. So first question is, as long as the loss does not improve much on the coarse grid, I know that it sort of converges, and then I do the fine graining, and you will see that the loss drops really fast at first because of this fine graining, and then it plateaus. That gives you a sense that, oh, you need to further do the fine graining at this point. Yeah, for the second question, so by default, the basis. So there are 2 things. The first thing is that how do I make sure the range of the grid? Because for B-splines, it's on a bounded region. That's something that MLPs need not worry about, because MLPs have the global activations. It activates everywhere. So in the training, for every few steps, I dynamically measure the range of these activations to make sure that the following splines will adjust its input grid to accommodate all the activations. So I dynamically adjust the range of the grid. Secondly, once we fix the range, how are these grid points distributed? So by default, it's distributed uniformly, but there's a tunable parameter you can tune to tune how much you want to adapt your grid according to the sample distribution. Perhaps you want more grid when there are more samples, and less grid when there are less samples. Yeah.
So, for example, in this figure, for the refined grid, you have the number of points is 2 times more, so the distance will be half, and
yes.
that gives you the location of the points in the new grid.
Oh yes. So the range are the same, And in both cases, they're uniformly distributed for simplicity. So the distance will be half. Yes.
Okay, nice. Thank you.
Oh.
Yeah, I will take care of this message. You continue.
Okay, great. Yeah. So the first property of CANs is that CANs can scale faster than MLPs. What I mean by that is that in large models we care a lot about the scaling of these models. That is, when you have a larger model or more data or more compute, the performance of the model will become better. This is actually not a very new concept. This is as old as classical approximation theory, where your approximation arrow L is a power law function of the number of model parameters, and here you have this scaling exponent called alpha. So we want this alpha to be as large as possible. But if we just want to approximate a function with d input variables, in general, and if the function has no structure at all, and you want to, partition the space into uniform grids, into d-dimensional uniform grids, and you use ordered k-splines to approximate the function, you will only get this alpha equals to k plus 1 divided by d. The feature here is that you notice that the divided by d is what we call the curse of dimensionality, which means that when d goes to very high, this exponent will be really, really small, meaning that when you increase your model size, the approximation error would not decay very fast. But by contrast, for a function, if the function can be represented as a smooth Kolmogorov-Arnold representation, then, as I said, because the theorem tells you that we can decompose a high-dimensional function into 1D functions and summing, so you only need to approximate 1D functions. So effectively, d now becomes 1, gives you a scaling law of k plus 1, which is much faster than the original, curse of the scaling law suffering from curse of dimensionality. So that's a really good promise. Can we achieve this empirically? And the answer is yes. At least for some simple examples, we care a lot about. Maybe in science, like the simple symbolic formulas. We can indeed achieve the scaling law here. So for the blue lines is for the CANs, and the red dotted lines are for the theoretical line. And you can see that in almost in all the cases, the scaling laws is aligned with this theoretical prediction, except for the second to last one, where it goes just too high dimensional. It goes to 100 dimensional. But still, we compare CANs with MLPs. CANs can achieve much better than MLPs, and MLPs suffer a lot from this curse of dimensionality.
Sorry, one question here. The scaling laws that you showed in the previous slide, do they hold when the input domain is unbounded?
It doesn't. Yeah.
They don't hold.
They don't hold. Yeah,
Okay.
it hinges on the spline approximation theory, and that would hinge on the bounded region.
Okay. And then another question is that do they hold when the function is not deterministic? In other words, if with a deterministic function, if you fix the inputs, output is fixed.
So you mean if there are noise in the data? Something then there is this irreducible error from the noise. So I guess that would be the scaling law plus that be irreducible noise.
Okay, but so the scaling law itself will hold, but there will be some correction to it from the noise.
Naively, I'd say yes, but noise may introduce some weird overfitting effect.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. So we also showed, besides symbolic functions, many functions like we care a lot in science are not symbolic functions, like special functions, the Bessel functions, etc. So we do the same thing and compare CAN with MLPs. We can still see that CANs outperform MLPs. The CANs are the blue lines, and MLPs are the orange lines, and CANs have better Pareto frontier. The x-axis is the number of model parameters, y-axis is the loss. So basically, to the lower left, the lower the left, the better. And the blue lines, the KNNs are like always consistently to the lower left of MLPs.
Sorry, another question. With a given number of parameters, how does the depth of a KN compare to the depth of an MLP?
Great question. So technically, what I literally did here was that I tried like 1,000 models for KNNs and for MLPs with varying depth, including 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And I also swept depth, and for KN, I also swept the grid, like how fine-grained the grids are. So I plot like this. I project this of 1,000 points onto this plane, but only plotting this Pareto frontier. So actually, from this, so coming back to your question, I report the shape of the network in the paper, but it could be depth 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. So I'm only reporting the Pareto optimal ones, and even from one point on the same Pareto frontier, from one point to another point, they may even have different depth. So, but I tried my best. Like it's unclear to me how to fairly compare these two types of models even. So here I'm just saying that I tried my best to make the fair comparison, but it could still be that, at least one subtle point is that a 2-layer MLP only have 1 layer of nonlinearity. So it should be compared with a 1-layer KN, not a 2-layer KN. So there could be a lot of subtlety in comparing these models, but so that's why here I run a lot of models and plotting the Pareto frontiers.
Okay, so one other question. So with the blue lines are for KNs, yes. So the error is decreasing because you are increasing the grid points, right?
Yes.
And everything else is just constant. In other words, you are not changing. Number of parameters is increasing by increasing G in the paper only. Is that correct?
So yeah, that's a bit technical. So for this plot, I only increase G.
Okay.
I only have one KN model in the sense that the depth and the width are fixed, but I only increasing G to sweep the scaling plot. But in this plot, I also tried various depth.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
All right. All right, great, thank you. And there's another question in the chat. In these experiments, is there any study exploring the effect of noise on the performance of KNs?
Great question. We never on purpose inject in noise, but in some cases later in the math and physics examples, I will argue that there are some effective noise that we'll encounter in like in those examples. But no, we did not test very rigorously the robustness of our method to noise. Yeah.
All right, thank you. I think you can continue.
All right. So you can use KNNs not only to approximate functions, you can use that to approximate a solution to a partial differential equation. And here we can combine KNN with the physics-informed learning and to solve PDEs. The scaling display similar pattern to the function feeding tasks, but here just show that KNN can not only do function feeding, but it can also solve PDEs. After training, you can even try to visualize the PDEs. You can even try to visualize the KNNs, and you see that in the first layer there are some linear functions. In the second layer, it looks like some sine functions. So you can get some insight of what these functions look like, and you can even try to symbolify them. And after you symbolify them, you can get a loss close to machine precision, which is something you cannot get with MLPs. But one caveat here is that it only applies to the case where the ground truth is indeed symbolic, but for many PDE cases, they're not symbolic. But at least you can get some interpretability, and in cases when they're indeed symbolic, you can even get the exact formula.
Sorry, if I may interrupt you here. Could you please go to the previous slide where you show this training curve?
Yeah.
Yeah, here. So looking into the first plot from the left, so we see at some steps your L2 error really jumps and then keeps coming back.
Yeah, yeah.
And what is the reason for that?
Oh, that's basically because of the grid refinement. Like when I do the grid refinement, when I try to initialize a fine-grained grid from a coarse-grained grid, the initialization effectively introduces some noise because they are not optimized yet.
Okay.
Yeah, but it will converges to a lower loss because of this. This is more fine-grained, so involves more parameters.
Okay, I
Yeah.
see.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. So maybe, yeah. So the second good property about KNNs lies in their interpretability.
So before you go ahead, can I ask a quick question?
Sure, sure.
So
yeah.
how the result is, is changing upon the, the activating function that we have. For example, if you go from, spline to polynomials, do the accuracy change?
Honestly, I don't know. All my experiments are done with splines. But when you say polynomials, you mean because
like polynomials for the activation function?
Well, in these cases, because the ground truth are not polynomial, I guess if you switch to polynomials, it will perform quite bad, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So
yeah,
it kind of depends on the question that you're asking. What type of activation function you want to choose. Is that true?
Yes. At least I think maybe we want to explicitly distinguish between polynomials and non-polynomials, because when you combine polynomials, you always end up with a polynomial.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is something also in the universal approximation theorem. They emphasize that you should not choose your sigma to be a polynomial. But for other non-polynomial nonlinear activations, they are universal approximators. But if you use polynomial activation functions, they can not be universal approximations. So a bit subtle here. But from the experimental side, we just experimented with the B-splines. Potentially, I think if you choose Fourier basis or Chebyshev basis, I guess they will work as well. But polynomials might be a bit sketchy, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Is there a question in the chat? Or oh, yeah, okay. Never mind. So, yeah. So the second point is interpretability. Usually we are faced with this task where we have some input variable x1 to xn, and you have some output variable y, and we not only want a black box model to fit the function, but also trying to understand what's happening under the hood. And here KNN provides you some intuitive picture. So here, let's consider this multiplication task. You're taking x and y, and you want to compute x times y. And the way I was very surprised by how the solution discovered by KNN is that here it first computes x plus y followed by a squared function, and here it computes x squared plus y squared followed by basically a negative linear function. So basically, the way it computes xy is by computing x plus y squared minus x squared plus y squared. That's how it gets 2xy. And in another case, division of two positive numbers x and y, the way it computes it is that first it discovers this logarithm of x and minus logarithm of y, and then at this node it computes logarithm of x minus logarithm of y followed by an exponentiation. So which gives you an x by y. Right. Let's see.
Sorry, there was a question. I think it refers to one of your earlier slides. The question reads, for this PDE, the domain is -1 to 1. For larger domains, example -10 to 10, do you expect cans to work just as well?
It depends on whether your problem is multi-scale. If your problem is multi-scale, I do not see, like cans may have some failure modes. But if it's multi-scale, I guess MLPs could also have some failure modes. But yeah. But if you just rescale the whole thing to -10 to 10, but still stick to this Poisson equation, and the solution is like uniform, then I would say that cans will perform similarly well.
Just a follow-up question on your answer. For a multi-scale problem, do you think a more sophisticated grid refinement strategy?
Yes. Maybe we need some adaptive grid allocation, something like that. But here it's just naively implemented as uniform grids. Yeah. Oh, great. Let's see. Yeah. So regarding interpretability, I will show how we get interpretability with this one example. Say we have X and Y as input and this formula as output. We can first train it. While training it, we also sparsify it. And after training, we see that, oh, there are a few nodes which are actually useless, so we can prune them away to get this small network. And then we notice that in the bottom left, this looks like a wave. This looks like this might be a sine function, so we can set it to be a sine. This looks like a parabola. We set it to be parabola. This looks like an exponential. We set it strictly to be exponential. And after that, this it achieved this machine precision, and then it can output the symbolic formula, which is quite nice. So yeah. Anyway, this is supposed to be a joke, but on the PowerPoint. So yeah, but here this is just an imaginary conversation between my advisor and Ken. Here Ken is like this. If you watch this Netflix series called the Trisolarian, the three-body problem, and in that Netflix TV show, there is this Trisolarians whose brains are totally transparent, and so they cannot hide any secret from others. So my point is that cans, as I showed here, is like the brains of those Trisolarians. You can easily interact with it, and you can easily understand what's happening inside, and you can even perform a surgery to it. Like you can set something to be strictly to be science, something like that. So that gives you the access to the brain of a neural network, which MLPs or other deep learning black box models may not give you such access to this to their brains. Yeah, I guess I'm a bit running out of time, but here are just two. Are we doing okay with time?
Yeah, and no worries about the time. We can also go over the time, no problem.
Okay.
It's recorded. People can watch later if they want to. So no
Okay.
worries.
Okay, great. Yes. So actually, I'm close to ending, but yeah. But before that, I want to mention two more realistic examples, like two. I want to show that KNNs can be useful collaborators for scientific research, for real-life scientific research. So I will present a math example and a physics example. So for the math example, it's a paper by Google DeepMind 3 years ago where they use MLPs to discover new relations in knot theory. So don't be intimidated by the term. I don't know too much about knot theory, but from the data science perspective, you just have a data table. Each knot you have some invariants, and you want to find the relations between these invariants across all the knots. So what DeepMind did was they used they trained an MLP to do the prediction, and they used the attribution methods to identify the important relevant variables, as shown here. They identified 3 important variables here, and then the human scientists in the team come up with this slope concept and prove the slope concept and prove an equation to be correct. the second step is all done by humans. So we want to see if our KNNs can rediscover these results. If we can rediscover these results with KNNs, with more automation and potentially discover something new beyond their paper. So the first thing is that, yes, we can indeed rediscover their results with KNNs. But what's surprising is that our KNNs only need one hidden layer and one hidden neuron. And that is even better. So we achieve comparable accuracy or even slightly better than their results with 5-layer 300 with MLPs. So this basically tells us, at least for this task, you don't need a very complicated architecture. You can just try you can use a simple KNN to do the task, and the connections, and you can tell the importance of these variables from the visualization of KNNs, and you can get very good intuition from it. You do not even need those attribution methods. You just stare at the KNN plot and look the strength of these connections, and the strength of the connections indicate the importance of these variables. Yeah, those are two technical details. But one last thing about this math example I want to mention is that we can discover something beyond the DeepMind paper. So they basically discovered this formula, but we also discovered the second and third formula from the from the data set. But then my collaborator told me that this formula is actually known in the literature. So it's a bit sad that we are not discovering some new mathematical equations, but still reassuring that we're discovering something useful. We're discovering something correct, not totally bullshit. But we need to. But I want to note that here I constrain the KNNs to be just one layer, so we can also make the networks deeper and deeper, such that we can potentially find more complicated formulas from the NOT dataset, which people have not discovered before. So that really achieving the new discovery, that's something as our future work. So for the physics example, it's a bit too technical. It might be a bit too technical, but we are studying this Anderson localization, and we want to, when we tune some physical parameters, sometimes your quantum states will become localized, sometimes will be extended. So we want to understand the phase transition, where the phase boundaries are in this physical parameter splitting. Like here, we show an example, and the green are corresponding to the extended states, I believe, and the purple points correspond to the localized states. So the goal for this one is to figure out the phase boundary, where the phase boundaries are according to this phase diagram. It's a quite simple task if it's just 1D, if it just has 2 variables, because in this case we can, our naked eyes can identify the phase boundary. But when it goes to high dimensional, then we probably need some machine to tell us about the phase boundaries, and that's what we test with KNNs here. No, I don't want to go into too much detail, but one thing I do want to mention here is that KNNs have 2 modes. One mode is automatic mode. If you feel lazy and you totally trust KNN, you can basically train it, and KNN will return a symbolic formula for you. But that symbolic formula may only make sense for some simple systems, because the task of symbolic regression can sometimes be ill-defined, especially when you have noise in your data. So sometimes you may want to go to the manual mode when you want to treat the KNNs not as an AI god, not as an oracle, but more like a collaborators, where you can communicate, you can collaborate, you can interact with each other. You can according to your domain knowledge, according to your inductive biases, setting some activation functions to be signed, to be symbolic, to be squared if you're fully sure that you are correct, and then you do the retraining, and then you again set some functions to be the things you like, and in the end you will reach something which is fully symbolic. But this automatic mode may give you something different from the automatic mode. But in terms of scientific discovery, sometimes there does not exist a strict or exact symbolic formula. As long as the formula can tell us something about the system and also have some prediction power of the system, that would be a nice prediction. Yes. So I'm close to an end, but before that, there are a few common asked questions. So yeah, I think you guys may also wonder about that, so I can answer that question first. So people are asking what a CAN's good or bad at. So I have to say that CANs, there's no free lunch. CANs are better than MLPs in some cases, but are still worse than MLPs in other cases. Maybe we can do a thought experiment. Let's think about a teacher-student setup. So if a task is generated by a teacher CAN, then a student CAN will perform better than student MLPs. On the other hand, if the task is generated by a teacher MLP, then a student MLP will perform better than student CANs. So the real question is, if our universe, if the physical world that we care about is generated by some network, is it more likely to be generated by CANs or generated by MLPs? And I argue that at least for the science today, they are more aligned with CANs in the sense that you can easily compile a symbolic formulas into CANs. And you can even, you can do the other way around, as I explained. You can easily extract symbolic formulas from CANs, but it's not that easy for you to compile a symbolic formula into MLP, not mentioning that it becomes even harder to decompile a symbolic formula, to extract a symbolic formula from MLPs. So from a philosophical level, CAN versus MLP are even a bit different from a philosophical level. So CAN is like a clock. So inside, the PCs are customized. They have learnable activations. But these learnable activations, these PCs in the clock, they have clear purposes. So it's easy to tear them apart and then reassemble. But MLP is like a house of bricks. These pieces, these bricks are produced in the same standard way. So it's difficult to tear them apart and reassemble. So the complexity of CANs actually coming from the complexity of individual parts, but the combination rules are simple. But the complexity of MLPs come from the complexity of the connecting patterns. Although the individual objects, those bricks, they themselves are simple. So in this regard, CANs are more aligned. Well, these are all very hand-wavy, but to me, CANs are more like reductionism, where you can decompose something complicated into easily decompose into something into subparts. But for MLPs, it's more aligned with holism, where its behavior coming from the connecting pattern, coming from collective behavior. So it's a bit hard to decompose MLPs into different parts and try to interpret those subparts.
Sorry, I think there's a question, Professor Otsi.
Yeah. Sorry, what's the question?
I think yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
So according to Kolmogorov-Arnold theorem, if we use the diagram that you used for CAN, any multivariate function can be approximated with 2 layers, right?
Yep.
So your network has many layers, not 2 layers. And so basically, we're not following the instruction of Kolmogorov-Arnold theorem exactly. It's like 2n plus 1 number of functions, and we use some arbitrary number of functions and so on.
Yes.
It seems to me that it's just very loosely related to Kolmogorov-Arnold theorem. And we are not, in fact, following the prescription of Arnold.
Right.
Kolmogorov-Arnold theorem in approximating this function. Because if we do, we don't need many layers. We just need 2 layers, and we know the number of nodes. We're not doing any of these.
Yes. Yeah, you are totally correct. So I want to argue that it is a feature, not a bug. So firstly, people have tried to strictly stick to the recipe, and it doesn't work for some cases, like for the last case, as you see here. So for this function, you need at least 3 layers to do the approximation. But but notice what the theorem says is that you can approximate with 2 layers, but these activation functions can be non-smooth. So our hope is that by stacking more layers, these activation functions can still be smooth. So that's the difference.
But do we have any theoretical reason to believe that if we add more layers, you know?
Not yet. I have to say that we don't have very good theoretical reason yet. It's just our, in some sense, naive optimistic. And recalling the spirit of modern deep learning, we just stack more layers. So it's like a bold courage, but yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So a follow-up. So from the functions that you tried here, was there a one that you weren't, like Can was not able to approximate using only 2 layers?
Yes. So the last example is such. If you look closely, I also plotted Can with 2 layers as the orange line. If you see closely here, it's actually hidden in the curves of MLPs here. So it behaves as worse as MLPs, but for a Can with 3 layers, it can go all the way down, follow the scaling law.
All right, but we have 2 more questions. Danielle?
Yeah, so I know that the Kolmogorov-Arnold theorem says that any multivariate function can be approximated as a combination of univariate functions. So I think the CANs, right, the first layer is learning the univariate functions, and the second layer is combining those univariate functions into a multivariate function, correct?
The first layer. So what's your definition of multi? So yeah, so maybe we can go back to the.
Okay.
Yeah. So you are saying that.
Yeah. So the first layer is learning univariate functions, right?
Right. And second layer, like say this node, it depends both on x1 and x2. So in that sense, it is multivariate. But again, it feeds into another univariate function.
Right. So it's like concatenating univariate functions. So there's a first univariate function, and then there's another univariate function which combines them. So it can be like a very simple, or it could be like a very complex univariate function combining
Yes.
the first univariate ones into the second univariate ones, right?
Yes.
Okay. And is it like the more nodes you increase in the second layer, the more possibilities or types of functions it learns?
Yeah. So intuitively, yes.
Okay.
Mathematicians would say the argument is a bit subtle, but I'm a physicist, so I say yes.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And there's like the ability to prune it, because I tried training a CAN once on my own, and it crapped out on me because it said that there were like too many parameters to unpack. So someone who's trying to make a mathematical equation, like, they can sacrifice accuracy maybe a little bit for more readability, right? If you're pruning the functions.
Yes. Yes. So that's what I show. That's what I show here.
Okay.
Yeah, like we have L1 function norm to regularize the network. So you can extract a subnetwork. Usually there's this trade-off. Like if you want to go simpler, you sacrifice some accuracy. But if your ground truth is indeed as simple as this, you get accuracy and interpretability at the same time. But real life applications are usually complicated and does not admit a very good representation. In that case, you have to choose between. You have a trade-off between these two.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's it. That was like a neat answer to my question. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for the question.
All right, next question, Hossein. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Actually, I have a question about the experiment in the paper talking about continual learning of the CAN. So I am actually interested for two questions. First, the experiment you reported there, the CAN that you used to make the results, was that a one-layer CAN, like only one layer?
Yes, yes. So there, I have to confess a few sneaky things. The first is that we are doing this one-dimensional experiment. And secondly, because in 1D, now CAN basically boils down to a spline function. So it is a one layer, and not only that, it's a 1-1. Has one input, one output. Now CAN is basically a spline. Yes.
Okay. So actually, and also I can see from the plots that the domain that you learn the modalities, they have no overlap to each other, right?
No, they don't have overlap.
Okay. So first, it sounds to me like sequential learning, because in community, when we say continual learning, it means that on the same domain, if a new task comes, so we are going to learn that task as well while not forgetting the previous one. So this is one thing that I was thinking, actually, I want to share with you. And the other thing that I want to say, if we go for 2 layers of CAN, do you think this feature still is there?
For one, let's see. That's a good question. So for 2D, there are some there are people on GitHub saying that for 2D functions, there's no continual learning with CANs. But you're asking 1D, 2 layers, that could be similar to 2D.
Yeah. So actually, I have an observation here that okay, if we go for the second layer in the back propagation, when we update the parameters of first layer is gonna update it, and then to match the new domain. And I believe that if you go for second layer, it actually violates the already learned weights of the first one. So actually, I think this property is still not there if you go for 2 layers.
So the trick here for continual learning is that your new data should be out of distribution for all the activation functions. And that story is very subtle when you go to 2 layers. For 1 layers, you're just taking in the input, which for sure it's out of distribution because the data is designed as such. But for 2 layers, because in training we cannot actually control the first layer very well, and the first layer, in the second layer, it receives a superposition of the input layers. So it then may not have this out of distribution behavior. So does not guarantee you continual learning.
Okay, thank you. That was my question. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
We have another question, Matthew. Go ahead, please. And you are muted. Yeah, please.
I have a bunch of questions. I don't know. So I'm going to start with maybe my big question, which is more stepping back. I think you addressed, I forgot who asked the question, but you may have got partly onto this question. So in my role, I'm looking at combining subsymbolic neural network methods along with symbolic methods towards creation of artificial general intelligence. And it seems to me, looking through these CANs, the CANs provide some of that, so to speak, symbolism layer.
Yes.
Versus the MLP or more traditional, transformer networks and so on.
They're more like connectionism, and CANs are like somewhere in the middle of symbolism.
Right, because each of it goes back to the basis functions.
Right.
Because the basis functions actually contain quite a bit of information at a more symbolic level than just being an unlabeled node.
Yes.
And so I'm thinking if somehow CANs and MLPs, and I think somebody else brought that up in a slightly different context, could be combined to create a more neural symbolic base layer.
Yes.
That could be potentially used for AGI, and that's just speculation.
Yeah. No,
you're a physicist, so speculation is all good.
Yeah, that's all. What you said, everything totally aligned with my intuition as well. So I would think that CANs are really good at dealing with like physical observables, but not necessarily perception or language. So we may need some modules to convert, say, vision data into these physical observables, and then use CANs to deal in the physical space. And then maybe we need another module to convert it back to the vision space, something like that. And MLPs or ConvNets or whatever, the methods we already have might be good use of to converting things from one modality to another modality. But within one modality, like especially the physical space, CANs might be good at dealing with the physical variables more than MLPs. So that's my guess.
And so another thought that popped in my head, you talked at one point, and I might be wrong here, but I thought you talked about that from a theoretical perspective, only the splines, I'm trying to remember, fit
have the scale.
The B-splines?
Yeah. I'm using the B-splines, and I was saying that only with the B-splines, our theorem in the paper, like those scaling laws are like our theorem is only correct when you use B-splines. If you use other activation functions to make it different, maybe faster, maybe slower, but I don't know.
Okay, but you didn't invest. I mean, obviously you can't have investigated all basis functions, families.
Yeah, no, and usually people use different assumptions. Like when you
Okay.
scaling law have some exponential decay, you need to assume some fast decay or something. But here we want to make more assumptions.
But then in a certain sense, you throw that all out anyway.
Yep.
And so my next question's kind of related to that. I was wondering if you'd thought of using wavelets.
Yeah.
You mentioned Fourier transforms.
Yes. Like for wavelet basis. I think there is one paper already done that. I think it's a very reasonable idea. Yeah, I'm not very familiar with wavelet basis. I only know that it's a local, but combined local and Fourier, and has this features. It's a reasonable idea. What's your take on what kind of applications might be?
I don't know. I learned that there's some new things have come out since I was there in kind of recently that I was unaware of. But I know I was just kind of it just popped in my head.
I think it's reasonable to try. Like someone has tried 20 different activation functions and report the numbers. Actually, not make too much difference, but still slight difference.
Right. I think the last question I had, I was curious, and I just wanted to understand better. The first slide onto the Anderson localization regarding the fractal dimension.
Yes.
Calculations.
Yes.
I was trying to understand that graph a little more clearly. So the red dotted lines, is that the phase where the phase transition happened?
Yes. And the green purple ones are the localized states and the extended states respectively.
Okay. again, this goes back to my first question because, and I haven't read the paper, I just saw it last night. From neuroscience, it does appear that there are fractal dimensional structures across species, something to this effect, in the brains of almost all species. And so anything like this always just kind of fascinates me. That's just like out there, but
right. I'm
I need
not
to,
sure if there's any phase diagram in neuroscience that you are interested, like maybe there are phase transitions you want to figure out. Then you can try CANs.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
So that would also fit in with some of that. Would just be kind of blue sky research, but
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Yeah. That should be awesome. Yeah.
there are obviously phase transitions that's connected to emergent phenomena, and you know it goes to these deep questions that I'm trying to, you know, where does mind emerge from? I mean, life, emergence of life, but there's also emergence of mind.
If you're done, can you ask also a question?
I'm done. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. So I wanted to ask kind of like a mathematical question. You know, when you're using the, you know, Kolmogorov-Arnold superposition theorem, we usually have the assumption that the function is, you know, is a superposition of, you know, continuous, you know, univariable function. But if the function is smooth, then that might be a problem. So I'm wondering if you're dealing with like a high dimensional and high smooth function, how does KNNs gonna, you know, perform, you think?
Is there
highly continuous smoothness function? And you know, there is a theorem that, you know, it says that then the approximation is going to fail. So then that means that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we don't have a very good theory about if you give me a data set or a task. We don't know how. We actually don't know how to set the network, like how to set the width and how to set the depth. This is the same as in traditional deep learning. We did not solve that. So I guess that in the end boils down to an empirical question. Did I understand your question correctly? You sound like you're asking the mathematical question.
Yeah, I'm saying that if you're dealing with a smooth function, which means that they are not, you know, continuous and differentiable enough, then, you know, this might be, you know, causing an issue. But you may be able to leverage, you know, on, you know, structural knowledge and, you know, with less number of data you could use as, for example. Yeah.
Right. Are you saying like integrates the known physics law, for example, into the KAN model or something like that? Yeah. Like definitely, if you already have some inductive biases, injecting those inductive biases can help you learn the thing better, potentially have more data efficiency. I guess people are trying to, like, the idea of equivariant neural networks, like to embedding symmetry into neural networks, and other inductive biases are also aligned with this line. So like KNNs, I believe, is just one, you know, foundational model for you to build upon. But there are tons of opportunities, and when you are in different domains, it's reasonable to also inject the domain knowledge into KNNs, not just use, because KNNs are still very bare, in the sense that it's not decorated with anything knowing in the domain, but it's possible to integrate, and even desirable to integrate the physics or the domain knowledge into KNNs, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I think we don't have any more questions.
Yeah, I guess that's basically what I want to talk about. Maybe just 2 last slides for some entertainment, for some philosophical question. People are asking, are KNNs are physical? Well, if we consider the Feynman diagrams as physical, then actually the Feynman diagrams are more aligned with multi-layer perceptrons, because say you first have particles flying freely in a physical space, and then on the nose they have some interesting nonlinear interaction. That's aligned with MLPs. And second question people are asking is that are KNNs biological? Because once biggest supporter of MLPs will say that MLPs are inspired from neurons in the brains, but actually not that. They're still different. But so that people asking, are KNNs biological? I don't know, but people on Twitter told me that actually the cells in humans in our retina behave more like KNNs when you first have nonlinearity and then have this linear combination. So it's the other way around of the neurons in human brains. Yeah, the last thing is just a quick list of what's happening in this domain. I feel that after the paper is released, many of my personal follow-ups have already been scooped. And here is what people are working, trying to apply KNNs to different domains. And yeah, what we discussed about trying to use different activation functions. And yeah, something like that. So yeah, I have to be honest that for me, I think it's very unclear how big a role KNNs will play in the machine learning in the end. I think we need more experiments before make the conclusions. And since I come from a physics background, it's my initial motivation to make KNNs probably initially natural science. So I did not expect that the machine learning world react that strongly to this new tool. I would imagine this is just a party for AI plus science. But for me, I think it's fascinating. Not only that KNNs will be a new, people can try that for their tasks, but also I think that it may bring something new to fundamental science. But that does not happen. That does not just naturally happen. And I will, try to make KNNs a better tool so that people can use KNNs as a collaborator, as a more useful collaborator in their scientific research. And hopefully in the end, use KNN as a collaborator, we can discover something like, I don't know, like the mechanism of high temperature superconducting, solve the millennia problems, solve the Riemann hypothesis, solve the Navier-Stokes singularity of Navier-Stokes equation. That would be awesome. But that's still a long shot. But I think KNN is, at least to me, I think gives me some optimism about using AI to solve those fundamental scientific questions. So yeah, that's basically everything I want to share. If you guys have more questions, I'm happy to chat further. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Zeming. We have 2 more questions. Hossein, please go ahead. You are
sorry,
yeah.
I was a mistake. Sorry, just there's no question. Sorry.
Yeah, Professor Rotzi, go ahead.
I just a question for clarification. When you do symbolic regression with KNN, so basically you make the model sparse, so you have some few edges. But this part is not quite clear to me that, okay, you have basically a function, I mean, a spline learned on each edges. How do you realize that this is corresponding to a particular symbolic function? It's exponential or it's polynomial? Or it's,
yes.
How do you do that?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, I missed the technical part, but the way we do that is that after training, we have that function parameterized at splines, but then we have a library of candidate functions predefined, like sine, exponential, squared, and we just do one-by-one matching, and we have a matching score, and we just select the best matching symbolic function for that.
So you do this manually, basically?
By manually, no. By what we mean by manually, so we have a function for you to do that. The code will do this for you.
Right. Basically, you know, this is the shape of this function look like a sign, and I have sign in my library, you know, I guess that's going to be a sign, something like this.
Yes.
So, yeah, but you said that's done algorithmically, like sampling and then minimize difference of squares or something like that.
Yes. So technically, for the spline and for a candidate function, I define R2, like the linear regression between those two. And the highest R2 will be the winner and will be replaced by that symbolic function. And I also want to mention that there are two kind of mode. One mode is this automatic mode, where it's doing what I just described. There's also this manual mode, where you can do this manually. If you look at, oh, it looks like a sign, you can set it to be sign. So we have two interfaces, depending on how much you trust this automation results. If you fully trust it, you can use fully automation. If you don't trust it that much, you can go partial automation, partial automatic. Partial
So I assume that in your table we have functions like sine, cosine, tangent, ln, and so on, right?
Yes.
But so basically there is an assumption here that the function that the spline is going to learn on an edge correspond to one of these basic functions. But it's quite possible that the spline is not corresponding to any of them. You know, it's a sine of cosine, for example.
Yes. So one thing one could do is that if you believe there are some other symbolic functions not included in library, you can add to the library, and we also provide an interface for that. And secondly, maybe
No, sorry to interrupt you. I mean, that may not be a basic function. It might be a composition of some functions. You know, it might be, you know, a function that you cannot represent by a basic function like sine, cosine, and so on. That's sine of cosine, for example.
Yeah, that's also possible. So you can just stop at here. Sorry, I'm not pointing it. So you can just stop at here.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the result. And if you believe it's symbolic, you can try the following steps. If you do not believe that, like my advisor is a big believer of the symbolic thing. I'm not a believer of symbolic thing. So that's why I would stop at step 2. But my advisor would say, oh, this looks like a sign, this looks like a parabola, let's do further symbolification. You can choose whether you believe it's symbolic or not.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we don't have any other questions. So I want to thank you, Ziming, again so much for the great presentation and for your patience with our questions. Actually, oh, there is one more question. Is there a question? Let me check. So, no. Yeah. So I want to thank you again for your presentation and for your patience with our questions, and everybody else for the great discussion. Recording will be available on the channel if you are interested. Other than that, we can end this call.
Yeah, thank you, Ziming. That was a great presentation. Appreciate
Thanks, Ziming.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.